The 35th anniversary of the People Power Revolution that deposed dictator and plunderer Ferdinand Marcos. In this edition of the Press Room, we'll discuss the legacy of EDSA, the peaceful revolution that restored freedom and democracy, not just in our country, but also inspired other peaceful movements across the world. Joining us to delve on this issue deeper is one of the framers of the 1987 Constitution, former COMELEC Chairman, Atty. Christian Monsod. It's all happening here, inside the place where journalists and newsmakers discuss pressing issues that matter to you. Welcome, Inside the Press Room. Hello, dear friends. Thank you for joining us inside the press room. I am your host, Romel Lopez, the Regions Editor of Press1.ph. Happy EDSA Day. Isang mapagpalayang araw po sa inyong lahat. Kasama po natin dito sa loob ng press room, once again, our editor, Felipe Salvosa II. Hello, Pe.
Magandang araw, Romel. Magandang araw sa mga panauhin natin ngayon at sa kay Manny.
At kasama rin po natin dito ang ating columnist at editor at large, Mr. Manny Mogato. Hello, Manny.
Magandang araw, Romel, Ipe, at wini-welcome po natin sa edisyong ito si Atty. Christian Monsod.
At gaya po nung sabi ko kanina, very special edition po tayo because we'll talk about the EDSA People Power Revolution and no other than imbitahan natin dito at nakasama sa loob ng press room ang isa sa mga main actors ng mga panahon na yun sa EDSA Revolution, none other than a member of the Constitutional Commission that drafted the 1987 Constitution and former COMELEC Chairman, Atty. Christian Monsod. Hello, sir. It's an honor to be inside the press room.
Magandang hapon po. Thank you for inviting me.
Magandang araw, Atty. Christian Monsod. Welcome sa press room.
Thank you.
So dahil nga ang pag-usapan natin ay yung EDSA People Power Revolt, si Atty. Monsod po ay isa sa mga main players nung panahon na yun. Before we started the recording of this podcast, Atty. Monsod was sharing some very interesting and very medyo proud moment din sa akin yun kasi listening to the stories that are not usually read and heard sa ating mga history books o mga nagkukwento about EDSA, pero siya pala ay na may part doon sa historic call ni Cardinal Sin for the people to go and march into EDSA. Attorney, could you share that to us?
Well, as you know, I think it was February 22nd when Enrile and Ramos announced that they were breaking off from Marcos regime, and we were finishing the count for the NAMFREL count for the elections, and we got a call from the office of Cardinal Sin asking Joe Concepcion, who was chairman of NAMFREL, and I was Secretary General, to go to the residence of the Cardinal. So we went there. We were brought by a team. One of them was Lea Navarro, was one of those who were the Claparol brothers. So they were our escorts, bodyguard daw namin. And so we went to Cardinal Sin in Mandaluyong. And there in the office of the Cardinal was then Monsignor Villegas, who is now Archbishop Socrates Villegas. And Cardinal Sin was telling us about his conversation with Enrile and Ramos, and he said we have to help them. They are broken off from Marcos, and this is a very momentous moment in our history. Then he said he was going on the air, and then he asked me, he said, can you make a first draft of the statement? So I went outside and was typing a first draft of that statement. And after I'd finished it, I gave it to him, and he liked it. He said, no, this is good. We'll make some editing, and I'm going to call Archbishop Ted Bacani, and I forgot the name of the Archbishop in charge of Veritas. And we'll finalize this, and I will go on the air. So I said, I remember that at the end of the statement, the statement ended for calling for the people to go to EDSA to show your power as a people.
Right.
And I don't know if he delivered it that way, right? But that was there. And so Joe and I told the cardinal that we have. What time would you be on the air? We have to call up all the NAMFREL chapters all over the Philippines. They're waiting for you, and because we told the NAMFREL chapter, wait for the cardinal. We're going to be talking to him, and so we left him, and we went to our NAMFREL headquarters, started calling up all the NAMFREL people who were just waiting in their offices and their homes. And that's what started the when the cardinal went on the air and called on them to help our friends who were there, go out to EDSA and so on. That was the minor role I played in that scenario. And when we look back at EDSA, there was a precursor. There was an event before the EDSA of February 22nd and 23rd. That was the election on February 7. And we were able to mobilize 500,000 volunteers to guard the ballot with their lives all over the country. And as a side, I'd like to tell you that we lost seven volunteers died in the EDSA elections and aftermath. And all of them came from the poor, because we organized all over the country. I went to 55 provinces to organize NAMFREL.
My parents were volunteers of NAMFREL, and proud ako ng kanilang kanilang political activism in their own way.
And it started there. So I remember Max Sullivan saying, "Wow, fantastic, this NAMFREL." They didn't have to do all of that.
Right.
To guard the ballot with their lives, but they did it, right? I think your parents, they were holding the ballot box, right?
Happened to my parents. They told the story din. Biglang nag-brown out nawala yung power dun sa isang polling precinct, and my mom told us na pag-uwi nila, they were shielding the ballot. Kasi nga may mga, actually some were mga goons, actually may guns who entered the precinct.
Yeah. At saka alam mo, we had a special volunteer group of scholastics and priests and nuns. They went to me and they said, we want to volunteer as a group, no?
Yeah.
And I said, sabi nila, you assign us to the most difficult places in the country, right? So we chose, and they said we will be the NAMFREL Marines, and they were the NAMFREL Marines in the most difficult places all over the country. I said, wear your sutana, right? Wear your nuns, your uniform or whatnot. And they were some of the bravest volunteers were there. I mean, they were there. I said, you go to that precinct in Manila. I said, go to Makati, and also, and they went. And that's
Attorney
how
Monsod,
it was.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, Attorney Monsod. Kasi this is a time of, as you know, a lot of historical revisionism on social media. So just for the record and to refresh the minds of people, as part of NAMFREL during the 1986 snap elections, can you give us the extent of an idea of the extent of the fraud and cheating and intimidation that happened? That warranted this bloodless revolution in EDSA in February 1986.
That's correct. Well, remember there was a previous election, right? And this was a snap election. I think the President Marcos was baited by a newscaster from the United States, and he said, "Well, I'm going to call elections in February ahead of time." Ahead of time, and then so we went around, and when we organized, we said to the people, let's not show our power, how much we're organized. Let them underestimate us. Just go, right? And we would say, who is the most influential person in your locality? Who do you respect the most? And that's the one we approached and said, can you organize NAMFREL here? Right? And so on. And that's how it was. And the theme was this. Remember what happened in the Middle East, where the Israel army were fighting in the desert and they had no communications. And we said, it's possible that communications will be stopped or will be obstructed. But remember, that you're not fighting alone, even if you don't know what's happening elsewhere. Wherever you are, just fight, and remember, everybody else is doing the same. And that's how we succeeded in these volunteers who said, yes, we'll do that. Then dito nagkagulo na sa Makati. And you know, we were saying, we cannot do this through armed means or violence. We will do this the democratic way in elections. We're even willing to go into elections in the playing field of Marcos. Right? We were willing to do it, and we will defend the ballot there. And there were people, I mean, our friends from the left did not believe that it can be done. That's why they were not at EDSA. They were not at EDSA. They didn't go to EDSA, right? Because they said, hindi niyo magagawa yan. That's why they had the armed component, NPA. Sabi namin, no, unless we do it through peaceful means, it's not meaningful. We have to guard the ballot. That's how it was.
Manny, anong panahon na yun, may naalala ka?
I was a very young police reporter at that time with the Manila Times under Sino. So around 5 o'clock, I was already at our office typing my police story at that time when Minister Enrile and General Ramos announced on radio that they are breaking up from Ferdinand Marcos. So after that, my editors at that time, si Berhel Santos, si Noel Cabrera, asked me to go to my beat sa may Manila Police, to look around and see if there is some movements near Malacanang. Kasi nga, mukhang may emergency, may crisis. So gusto niya tignan kung merong troop movement within Malacanang Palace. So I went there. I stayed there until 9 p.m. Mukha namang normal na tahimik yung lugar. Wala ganong nangyayari. But around that time, at 9 o'clock, I think people have started going to EDSA. Kasi nga, si Butch Aquino already marched from Cubao to EDSA. And Cardinal Sin, sabi nga ni Atty. Monsod, nagtawag na ng tao. So, during the 4 days of the revolution na tawag nating EDSA, People Power, hindi ako mauwi sa bahay namin. Doon lang kami natutulog sa opisina namin, sa mga mesa, ginagawa naming higaan. Pag madaling araw, tulog, tapos bangon ulit, ikot na naman sa mga beat, I was not inside Camp Aguinaldo and Camp Crame because I was a police reporter, so I moved around. I moved around Channel 4, sa EDSA, sa Makati. So yun ang aking participation. Nakita ko yung mga tao na walang takot, na hinaharap yung mga tangke, hinaharap yung mga sundalo. At yun, talagang pag inisip mo, balikan yung mga nakaraan, nakakapangilabot yung pangyayari yun.
You know, there is one thing. During the time, the EDSA, 22, 23, 24, 25 of February, si General Ver kept on asking, and this is historical and we've verified this, Marcos na, let's go, and start shooting, right? But the people were laying down in the street in front of the tanks and so on. Obvious, there was no armed protest. And Marcos several times refused to give the order to shoot. And I always say, there's always some good in everybody, right? And this was one of them. Can you imagine? It would have been a massacre if he gave the orders. But I don't know if the military would have used their guns. Because the military at the time, I think, was already having their own change of mind in the process, seeing the people. And that was it. People call it a revolution. I think you're correct. You use the word revolt. We were investigating, the Davide Commission was investigating the coup d'etats. And after that, in our conclusions, we decided to call it the People Power Revolt rather than revolution, because we had not fulfilled all the promises of EDSA yet. Once we have fulfilled the promise, then we can call it a revolution. And there were two things there. Number one, we proved to the world that it's possible to have radical political change, like bringing down a dictatorship through peaceful means, democratic means. And our vision, our hope and vision was that we will be able to achieve radical social change through peaceful means. And that's why the Constitution is related to the message of EDSA, right? That radical political change, we did it. We will do radical social change, because we had centuries of mass poverty and gross inequalities that have been impervious to change. And we said we will do it the way we did radical political change. Unfortunately, all the administrations after EDSA did not fulfill the promise to the poor. That historic moment when the rich and the poor, locked their arms and promised one another, we will change this. And that's our situation today. We remember EDSA. It's still a revolt, not a revolution. And if you look at the Constitution, the EDSA was certainly the inspiration of the Constitution. But we realize that the main problem we have to address is mass poverty and gross inequality. That's why the heart of the new Constitution is social justice and human rights. There's never been a Philippine Constitution, and I think nowhere in the world except one other country, where there is a separate article on social justice than us. So that's the first compelling principle in the Constitution, right? Social justice and human rights. There are three. And then the other two, they say that the life of the law, yung life of the law, is not logic, it is experience. Kaya yung number two compelling principle ng Constitution, according to me, anyway, is never again to any authoritarianism.
Right.
Never again.
Because of the experience.
Yeah. And number three, the economy must be firmly and safely in the hands of Filipinos themselves. Because, yung 1935 Constitution was a relatively good Constitution. But we amended it to give parity rights to Americans. Okay. So that they had equal rights on our natural resources and so on, our patrimony. And when they implemented that, they exploited our natural resources. And then we could not change our exchange rate, even after independence, without the approval of the United States. Now, why was that? Because the Americans wanted to be able to remit the peso wealth here through that, that the exchange rate is not moving. So they got more exchange rate. The United States allowed the pound to devalue, but did not allow us to devalue. And we had, after that, the crisis of the 1950s on foreign exchange, right? So they said, we cannot. We must say the economy must be in the hands of Filipinos themselves. That's why I'm objecting to all these provisions about transferring the power of the limits of foreign ownership from the Constitution to Congress, right?
Attorney Monsod,
three compelling principles. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Attorney Monsod, earlier you were talking about how in the 1987 Constitution, it turned out that the legislature became bicameral rather than unicameral, although there was a vote in the Constitutional Commission, except that the tie was broken by Commissioner Villegas. So can you tell us more about it, and what were your realizations 35 years after?
Yeah. Well, when we were writing it, we were writing it by chapters, and when we assumed that we would have a unicameral legislature, so the voting for the unicameral or bicameral came after we had drafted certain things, like on the economy, for example, the article on the economy, and we frankly overlooked it. There are two provisions where the editing committee overlooked that's bicameral, unicameral. They did not put voting separately in amendment. Correct. The other one was the Judicial and Bar Council, where there's only one representative from
for
Congress
both chambers.
instead of
Yes.
two, right?
That's a source of controversy even today. Huh?
Yeah, but the Supreme Court said no, one is one, right? One is one. There are only three provisions of the Constitution said voting by all the members. That one on the amendment, and the other is on pardon, like Trillanes pardon, and the other is tax amnesty. You know? And in the other two cases, the practice is voting separately. Voting separately. And so our argument is that in the hierarchy of laws, an amendment to the Constitution is certainly up there. In ordinary legislation, it is separate vote. Why will you have a joint vote? In the hierarchy of amendments or changes in the Constitution, where amendments is very important, more important than ordinary legislation. So that's where the issue is on separate or joint vote. You are in effect with a joint vote, you are setting aside the Senate. They only count as one each, or 24 votes against 200 or 300 congressmen. That's the issue. And
More than 3 decades later, having a bicameral legislature better for the democracy than having a unicameral one, given the experiences of this dictatorship?
Correct. I think after our seeing what's been happening to our country, bicameral was correct. So that in the system of checks and balances, executive, judiciary, and legislature, within the legislature, there's also checks and balances. And that's why, to me, as it turned out, it was correct that we finally enacted a bicameral legislation.
Attorney, yun nga, we're talking about the provisions of the Constitution, but this very same Constitution, as you know, has come under attack in successive administrations now. And people have been trying to change it, coming up with so many arguments, no, or trying to do the job piecemeal. For example, right now, ang gusto nila, economic provisions lang muna, because they couldn't probably muster enough political will to change the whole thing. No? And what are your views on the 1987 Constitution? Because you seem to be in the side in which, well, it's 35 years old now, but it's the best charter that we've got now to protect our hard-won rights, no, our democracy that we restored in 1986, 35 years ago.
Yeah, well, people say, well, it's already 35 years. The U.S. Constitution is 230 years, right?
Correct, yeah.
And they have managed, well, there have been something like 27 amendments, for example, and some repetitions, like the 14th Amendment they're talking about now, about due process and all that. And I think that the present Constitution, the principles are clear. The principle, even in the case of party lists, the principles are clear. And if you try to mess around with it, right, and then find out that it was wrong, then you should first try legislation. So like when they say more autonomy for local governments and shares, why don't we change or amend the local government code first and see if it works? Right? One aspect of it, the Supreme Court has made the decision already that the share of the LGU should be larger because it takes in all the other taxes, and so they get a bigger share now. It's happening, and I say, try changing the local government code. Try changing the law on party list instead of saying, well, let's get rid of the party list. because it just allows communists to be in Congress, right? Like the president said. And I say, party list precisely was put there so we can hear all the voices in the democracy, right? You know, they believe in certain ideology as long as they do not act unlawfully on it.
I was
But
about to ask that question din, attorney, about sa party list system. Kasi yung principles nga, like what you mentioned, was to give everyone in our country a voice, lalo na sa pag-craft ng mga batas. Pero naman natin na parang ginagamit na rin ito, nakatayap din to sa isang provision ng Constitution na ginagamit itong party list system ng mga local political dynasties.
Correct.
Na alam din naman natin na in-address din yun ng Constitution natin kasi nga nung panahon ni Marcos ay yung alam niyo na yung mga malalapit lang sa pangulo ang nag-e-enjoy sa kayamanan at kapangyarihan ng bayan. At
saka hanggang ngayon, is ba sumama pa ang sitwasyon natin sa political dynasties. Right. Tama yun. Yung party list is been abused, right? So as sa akin, ang pinakatamang desisyon, yung latest decision ni Justice Carpio, that comes closest to the concept, yung party list dun sa ating constitution. I was very much involved in that. In fact, I'm cited as one of the authors of that. And to me, let's get to the principle. What is the principle of the party list? Number one, gusto nating magkaroon ng boses, mapakinggan natin lahat ng boses. Particularly yung mga boses na hindi mananalo sa legislative by district, in district election. Pero they have a national following, who believe in certain principles and so on. And we must hear them. Kailangan bigyan natin ng oportunidad dito na magkaroon ng seats sa Congress so we can hear everything. So in a democracy, right? So yun ang number one. In other words, it is proportional representation. The principle of proportional representation. The principle of listening to all voices. Pero sabi namin, for the first 3 elections after the Constitution is put into effect, bigyan natin ng reserve seats yung marginalized sectors na tinatawag na economically marginalized. But sabi namin, that's good for reserve seats are only good for 3 consecutive elections. After that, open na natin yan to the principle of proportionate representation. And number 2, that the purpose, the party list system is a social justice provision.
Right.
To diffuse political power. Ang nangyari, it's been used by certain dynasties to concentrate more power in themselves. So sabi sa akin, let's amend the law. There's nothing wrong with the concept in the Constitution. Right?
Alam niyo, maganda talagang guest si Atty. Monsod kasi naging COMELEC din siya. No? So, Atty. Monsod. No? So, kung titingnan niyo rin yung party list system, Atty. Monsod, hindi po ba problema rin ito sa bahagi ng accreditation ng COMELEC ng mga party list groups.
Yes. Marami din kamalian ng COMELEC dyan. Nagpagamit at some point, I think it was also a way of making money. Lahat nire-register na. How can you register? Do the tricycle drivers of Mandaluyong City have a legislative agenda? Anyway, so sa akin, let's amend the law. Three points. No, the limit of 3 representatives per party is wrong because it violates proportionate representation. Right. Number 2. I think in the Carpio decision, the only thing that I think stands out that I think should be changed is the provision that those nominees of the party list should belong to the party list. In other words, they must be part of the organic party list. Tapos nakadagdag doon, or of a track record of advocacy. Yun ang loophole. Right? Because anybody can say, oh, I have been advocating this one, so on and so on. Diyan ginamit ng mga politiko yung party list to put their wife or their husbands or their cousins and to that kasi daw merong track record of advocacy for their principles and their values. So mali yun, di ba? So because the whole purpose precisely is to diffuse political power. And then number 3, we should put a provision, an anti-dynasty provision in the party list law. Meron na yan doon sa kabataan, no, sa election, meron na, they're trying it. Well, I was telling when these people were telling me na, no, kasalanan niya ng Constitution, hindi kasalanan ng Congress. Sabi ko, hindi, Congress has waited 35 years, did not implement the constitutional provision. Right. And I said, itong anti-dynasty law, the reason we put it there, because sabi namin, kung ilalagay natin yan na 4 degrees sa Constitution, what happens when we have politically matured, right? Siguro hindi na kailangan yung 4 degrees. Kailangan siguro 2 degrees na lang. And then altogether, when we have attained a certain maturity, then we don't need the anti-dynasty provision anymore. That's why we put it that way, that the definition of dynasty should be left to Congress in order to be attuned to hopefully the maturation of our political system. And to me, those are the changes we should do in the party list law to improve and to make it really be an implementation of the concept. This thing about yung marginalized sector, it was meant for marginalized sector. Even the Supreme Court at some point in 2 decisions made that mistake. That's not true. It is not, when we say marginalized and underrepresented, it's not necessarily economic.
Right.
Right? It's about ideals and values and ideology and so on. So,
for example, attorney sa Europe, no, may mga Green Party, no?
Correct. Di ba? Meron, di ba? And
activists sila.
Yes. So sa akin, let's change the law. And then, of course, the Supreme Court will follow. Kasi andyan sa batas yan eh. Sabi ng Supreme Court.
Isang podcast namin nga, attorney, na pinoint out ni Manny yun eh. Di ba, Manny, yung isang party list na pinangalan niya sa sarili niya, yung marginalized sector, yung initials ginamit niya. So,
really?
Tsaka yung alam naman natin yun, di ba, attorney, yung isang anak ng dating presidente na biglang naging advocate ng mga security guard.
Yes, of course. Nakatira sa Forbes Park. How could you represent the security guards you live in Forbes Park?
Hindi naman siya gumagawa ng batas para sa mga security guard.
Isa rin yun, di ba?
Oo.
Actually,
ang pinagkakaabalahan yung TV network franchise.
Di ba?
Oo.
Ang party list na pinaglalaban daw is yung universal healthcare, pero nagtataka tayo kasi meron naman universal healthcare law. So ngayon, nag-focus na siya sa ABS-CBN franchise and going after ABS-CBN's supposed pagkakautang daw. Pero matanong ko, attorney, nung after na ma-ratify na yung 1987 Constitution, and then there's this provision on anti-dynasty. Ano yung naging reaction mo na yung Congress under the term of Cory Aquino did not work on passing a law against political dynasties?
Well, all of them. All the legislatures, because of vested interest, did not want to put that in. So actually for 2019, when there were talks about federalism and changing for the better, beautiful future, and I said, why don't Congress pass a law for the 2019 elections on the anti-dynasty law? Why are you waiting for federalism and a new constitution and say we will lock it into the provision of yung anti-dynasty? Hindi ba sinasabi nila? Sabi ko, wait, why don't you just pass a law now to apply to the 2019 elections? Did they pass any law? Of course not. So I said, how can we trust you? How can we trust you to do things you're promising when here is a test for your sincerity? Pass an anti-dynasty now and make it applicable to 2019. Silence. Correct?
Yun nga, Manny, di ba, you cannot trust the legislators with that kind of a job because they want to legislate against their own self-interest, di ba?
Saan nakakita na yung mag-asawa nasa Kongreso?
At saka
kapatid. May magkapatid din.
Oo. Hindi, mas tayo yung tagig.
Di ba?
Hinati yung dalawang distrito. Ibang bahay ba sila?
The political dynasties worsening. That problem is worsening. We have to do something about that. Right. There is some flicker of hope in the 2019 elections where some,
Right.
political families lost.
Right.
Lost.
Yeah.
The Estradas lost.
Hmm.
The Osmanians lost. Maraming dynasty. Meron new dynasties that are coming up. But I mean, it shows you that nag-iisip din yung ating mga kababayan. Nag-iisip din sila. Medyo, sabi nga sa akin ng mga farmers in urban poor I work with, sabi nila, alam nyo sir, yung mga traditional names in politics, naiinis na kami eh. Kasi ang tagal namin nag-aantay. Nandiyan sila, panay pangako before election, hindi naman tinutupad. Kaya, humanap tayo ng mga kabataan at sa mga ibang pangalan, no? And that's why as I mentioned it today, we are putting together a coalition of organizations, church, and so on, to say get register and vote, because there are many people who are not registered,
Right.
and we need their votes to hear all the voices of democracy. We're launching it. In fact, we've started on it. It will be, because we only have up to the end of September. And ang target namin is 7 million young voters or voters who never registered. Yun ang target namin. Anyway.
Welcome to talk about it sa press room, attorney. Yung advocacy.
Thank you.
Attorney, moving forward, kasi napag-usapan natin yung snap election nung 86, no? And you will have election next year. So paano nyo kayang i-counter ngayon itong lumalalang disinformation sa ating lipunan na maaring maapekto sa ating halalan next year?
What news? What kind of propaganda?
A lot of propaganda na parang ang choices ng tao isang pamilya na lang.
Hindi yata mangyayari yun.
Sana po di mangyari. Pero meron po pa kayong ginagawa yung NAMPREL para i-educate yung ating mga voters.
Hindi lang naman NAMPREL kasi we call it Election 22 coalition. And let me tell you, we invited the two main political parties, PDP Laban and Liberal Party, to give us support. Because we want to prove we are united in getting people to register and vote, even if we disagree on certain issues and on choices of leaders. This is just a coalition to tell people, let's hear you. You must register to vote. It's a civic duty. That's what we're trying to do with this, right? That's how we work. Try to see, let's make democracy work. And this is what we're trying to do.
Ito yung essence ng 1986, attorney, di ba? Mapumoto yung Pilipino, no? Although medyo natagalan bago nagalit ang taong bayan, medyo natagalan yun, it took the assassination of former Senator Aquino to arouse public anger. Pero just the same 3 years later,
except
nataubang diktadurya.
Yeah, except in 1986, we have to stress na peaceful means because we were really under an active authoritarianism.
Right.
And to us, putting this coalition together, and with the two political parties, main political parties supporting us, and our partners are the COMELEC and the Commission on Human Rights, and then CPCP is there. We have all kinds of young people, and I said, don't give us old people as examples. I want to see the faces of the young leaders of this country. Let them promote this. Let them talk to the people, and particularly the youth. That's what we want to happen. And if we can prove that we can make democracy work, maybe there'll be less violence in the elections. Right? And because people can learn to discuss and debate the issues. And you must understand, in a democracy is about compromises. Right? It's about discourse, it's about debate, and it's about compromises.
It's not just about the rule of majority. You should also take into account the views of
correct,
the minority,
yes,
smaller groups.
that's correct. Yeah.
Attorney, siguro sana yung advocacy kasama rin talaga yung mga LGUs kasi in one city hall where I went to, there was a very, attorney, siguro matutuwa ka dito. There was a very long line of people lining up at the COMELEC office to register. I think a lot of people really want to register. Ang problema po, Attorney Monsod, yung COMELEC, parang they do not have the capability to accommodate the, the dozens and dozens of voters that flock to their offices every day.
Right.
So, paano kaya natin masusolusyonan yun?
Ang nangyari kasi, parang nagkaroon ng ratio and the COMELEC could not cope with it totally. And of course, there's the problem of the pandemic. So one of our proposals is that the COMELEC officials must be considered as frontliners for purposes of vaccination. Number two, and the COMELEC has already agreed with this, that there will be satellite registration places, not just in COMELEC offices. And the church has offered that the parishes can be registration points, satellite registration points. So we're trying to make the necessary structural changes to make it easier for people to register.
Yung bang voters list, do you think can it still be purged of names of people who are flying voters or ineligible to vote o patay na? Is that something that's still pressing?
Yeah, they're cleaning it up, and they have actually deactivated 7 million. Yung people who did not vote in the last two elections. Those people have to register again. In addition to the 4 million who are going to be 18 years old.
Well, the electoral process is also isa sa mga pamana ng EDSA sa atin, di ba? Kasi alam naman natin nung panahon ni Marcos may election kunwari pero lahat ng mga nasa partido niya nanalo.
Well, let me tell you a side story on the election. We were NAMFREL and we were accredited by the COMELEC, NAMFREL. Tsaka ang daming international observers.
Right.
So ang aming usapan sa COMELEC at that time, there was only one opposition there, di ba? But and one of them was my classmate in law school, Marcos Boy. And we said, paano natin, which precinct count will we count? So ang sabi namin, well, you accredited us. Dapat yung bibilangin nating precinct count, nakapirma doon, not only the COMELEC, but NAMFREL. Yung NAMFREL volunteer. Alright. So, yun, pwedeng bilangin ng NAMFREL in its own count. Okay? Sa kanila, iba yun. Right? Pero yung sabi ko, yun ang aming count. Okay naman. Meron kaming agreement. Pumayag sila ganun. So, nakamali sila. Because in some places na total domination by Marcos people, they barred the NAMFREL volunteers from the precinct. So walang pirma yung NAMFREL volunteers. We did not count those votes per our agreement with the COMELEC.
Kaya doon na laman lalo na medyo konting hocus-pocus nga.
Sila in other words, that was the agreement and they could not tell us. I said we only counted where there were signatures of volunteers. Meron pa, ang dami pa nila kailangan ang suot ng volunteer white. Yung sinunod namin lahat yun.
Kayo nga po pala suot niyo yung yellow vest niyo, no? vest.
This is for the anniversary.
For the EDSA anniversary.
But I still have the original. I still have it.
Yun ang isa sa dahilan kung bakit meron ng discrepancy yung NAMFREL count tsaka yung COMELEC count.
Yeah, and we said, ito yung aming count, the COMELEC. And then, of course, meron din count yung di ba? Yung nag-walk out.
Right, yung sa batas.
Sa PICC.
Yeah, and they went to the Redemptorist Church. I went to the Redemptorist Church and I said, why did you walk out? Eh, paano po niyayari nila yung kung ano-anong ginagawa nila and we don't want to be part of it.
Well, Atty., moving forward, like we're in the 35th anniversary now, and I'm reading these comments sa social media. Anything na post about EDSA, may mga comment na parang siguro, well, obviously coordinated kasi ang sagot nila, nag-EDSA revolution na naman para makinabang yung mga oligarchs at yung mga malalapit sa kanila. Napaalis si Marcos pero sila nakinabang. How could you react to this?
Well, actually, every administration, from our experience as we see it, it's true, right? That those connected took advantage. Took advantage, whether it was, the yellows or the reds or whatever it is. Unfortunately, at saka there was a deepening and strengthening of political dynasties. That's why we have been unable to achieve radical social change. I had a big debate about agrarian reform. The business community said, it was unsuccessful. Sabi ko, hindi. It's not, right? First of all, you guys underfunded it. The budget was 225 billion for 20 years, and you the Congress dominated by landowners and business only provide 175 billion, right? Okay, second, you had agrarian reform communities, good concept, infrastructure, support services, and so on. But only 55% of the farmers were in those agrarian reform communities. You did not give enough money to create other agricultural reform communities where there is a integration of support services. Do you blame the farmers for that? The 55% of the farmers who were included in the so-called agrarian reform community, 81% said the quality of our lives improved. The shortcoming was in the government, not in the program. And every government after EDSA is guilty of that. So
Attorney,
I agree. Yeah.
Attorney,
Go ahead.
ito bang 1987 Constitution, did it envision a scenario wherein the Marcos family, which was deposed, would be returning to power? Na-imagine ba yung ganong scenario?
But that was possible because people change their mind. As a matter of fact, if you look at even Aquino, the father of Benigno Aquino Jr. was accused of collaboration with Japanese, Why should you let that be the burden to Ninoy? He died for our country, and so there is a possibility that the descendants of people we took out of power are better people. That's why I always say, when you say, I believe that there is a statesman in every politician, and it is up to us to find it. Up to us to find it, to keep on trying to find it, so that statesman in them will prevail over their self-interest.
Attorney, bali final question natin to para marap up natin yung program natin. 35 years, is EDSA still worth celebrating?
Yes. Well, EDSA is worth celebrating because it left us with an unfulfilled promise that we have to do, right? And it's a legacy not only to us but to the world. East Germany, the European countries, they took the lesson from us because we were doing this on international television, right? And if you listen to the Filipinos at the time, they said, people are shaking our hand, and praising us wherever we go. The Filipinos were the heroes of democracy. And sayang right? Sayang. And we have to relive EDSA. We have to, reignite that spirit and that vision in our people. Because we've done it before. There's no reason why we cannot do it again.
Tama po.
And with that, maraming salamat sa pagpapaunlak niyo sa aming invitasyon, Attorney Christian Monsod. It's very, very
Thank you, sir.
Enlightening.
Educational is really an honor for me dahil nga ang mother ko, ang parents ko, both my mother and my father are non-federal volunteers and played a big role nung since the assassination of Senator Ninoy Aquino until dun sa mga rallies na pinatawag ni Cory Aquino and even sa EDSA. Well,
give your mother our love and our regards.
she will be very happy when she sees this podcast. I'll tell her that. Thank you again. Thank you again, and thank you again, Atty. Monsod. As I said, open po ang aming programa, aming podcast para dun sa inyong advocacy for voter education for 2022. The press room is always open for you.
Oh, sa launching. Sa launching.
Sa launching.
Yes.
Sa launching.
Ay, salamat. We'll call on you. Thank you for inviting me.
Maraming salamat po sa ating mga listeners and viewers. Hanggang sa muli po dito sa loob ng press room. Magsama-sama po ulit tayo. Ingat po sa lahat. God bless.
Thank you.
Kalayaan.